at the end of the day, we've got a lot of complication going on in academia right now. And I think it's because people want to make it look hard, and they want to make it be difficult when it's not actually necessary to make it so complex. The greatest sophistication, right, is in the most beautiful ultimate sophistication is actually simplicity, as Leonardo da Vinci often said.
So
Totally.
I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah,
Sure.
me too.
Yeah.
Congrats on your wedding. I know
Thank
it's been
you.
like a year now. How are you
Yeah.
doing as a newly married adult?
We're doing really well. It's been amazing. I'm very grateful. It was an incredible wedding, and it's been an incredible year. I recommend it to people. Find somebody who compliments you and stick with them.
That's good. That's good. You know, we have to battle this zero populations growth thing, right?
Yeah.
So you got to do your part to replenish the earth.
Yep, working on it. So
good for you.
But yeah, I know you are involved in a great many topics, and I kind of wanted to see if you could give just an overview of your latest projects, and then I wanted to talk a bit to start with you about your thoughts on tying spirituality and science, and just the kind of how the perspective and path of the self-teaching of an autodidact and becoming a polymath in different topics ties in with that a bit. So I did want to say that your TED Talk is one of my favorite TED Talks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I love your work. I love your posts as well. I love how you dive into making and pointing out relationships that are not obvious, and especially between numbers and consciousness, which I think is really interesting, because I think that's the foundational basis actually of what we call consciousness. In fact, you could say that the coherence of consciousness is what we call geometry.
Yeah, it's definitely something I wanted to talk to you about today. I actually have an idea that we can talk about that I haven't talked with anybody else about a bit, that has to do with that. And I know you do a lot of work with prime numbers, and I think that ties in quite a bit with that topic. So
yeah, no, I love what you're doing. Love what you're doing. So you don't be afraid. You can ask any question. I know you like to go deep on stuff, so I'm happy to go deep on anything. But I'll just try to attempt to answer your question on what are the things that I'm doing, like the latest things I'm doing. And gosh, it's kind of like sometimes I have to take a step back and go, what are all the things I'm doing? I've got 17 different companies in my portfolio of companies. So that probably occupies a good part of my time. The part that it doesn't occupy, I am doing things like geometry. Lately, I've been on a kick on perspective geometry, because every time I draw perspective geometry, I really feel like the coherence of consciousness is geometry. Mm-hmm. It's also another word we can use for it would be like gravity. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we noticed in the paper we wrote last year on geometric, novel classifications of geometric spiral for, natural sort of structures in the universe, be they hurricanes or galactic structures and spiral galaxies, is that the geometry is based on polygonal spirals. It's not based on the natural logarithm as we have thought about it. All of the astrophysicists that have written papers on it basically are showing that they have to make a pitch adjustment to get the Euler number to fit into the spirality that we see in galaxies. And the universe is simple. If it's not simple, then it's not right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we've got a lot of complication going on in academia right now. And I think it's because people want to make it look hard, and they want to make it be difficult when it's not actually necessary to make it so complex. The greatest sophistication, right, is in the most beautiful ultimate sophistication is actually simplicity, as Leonardo da Vinci often said. So, we know that the structure behind galaxies are polygonal spirality that can be expressed in 2 or 3 or probably high dimensions. It doesn't matter. because all of the information is compressed in the lower dimensions anyway. So all the information of the higher dimensions is compressed in the lower dimensions. I know that's interesting, right, to kind of think about. So you could say that as we expand our awareness, we're basically decompressing and bringing into our consciousness all that compressed information that we also would call gravity, right? Scalar waves.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like a big spider web behind the basis of all the galaxies, and we were able to match them perfectly. Not only, we could even predict the speed of a hurricane based on the polygonal spiral that was associated with that hurricane without ever measuring the speed of the wind on the ground. We could just look at it from a satellite photograph and know exactly what the speed is on the ground based on, you know, whether it's a mod 15, a mod 16 spiral, a mod 18, or a mod 20 spiral. That was basically categorizing hurricanes 3, 4, and 5, right, of their categorizations, right? Levels 3, 4, and 5. And we did that for 1s and 2s as well. So tropical storms, we actually looked at all of this. And this is the same structure that's being used as a backdrop for galactic structures. So I came away after doing that paper saying, geez, I think Einstein often said, and we thought it was figurative, he said that geometry is gravity. But actually, I thought it was figurative and maybe metaphorical, but now I realize, no, it's literal. Mm-hmm. Geometry is gravity. So when we expand consciousness, we're decompressing the information that's in those, you know, gravitational compressions so that we can have access to them in our conscious minds. It's this constant, you know, inhalation, exhalation between the conscious and the subconscious mind that I believe creates the U inverse around us. So, you know, the types of projects that I'm involved in today are, you know, I'm very much involved in cryptography. I have 2 companies in the cryptography field. One is called Theon, where I'm, you know, the head of the kind of research and development for it. I'm the founder of it as well. And they work on the sort of business to business sector. Another company I have is Crown Sterling. Crown Sterling is a champion of data sovereignty. We believe that the playing field needs to be leveled for consumers and governments alike, and that everyone should have the right to express themselves. And we are building a social platform. It starts off as like a Telegram style app that's completely based on one-time pad encryption, so it's quantum resistant. And it will be eventually a social media platform for everyone to be able to not worry about censorship or anything. Now, there'll be protection mechanisms in there that will be built in. It's a decentralized system. There's no oversight per se to say that, you know, you can't say this. But if you wanted to post something like, you know, pornography for children or something like that, it wouldn't let you because the technology would just stop it from doing it. But there's no oversight of it. Nobody's looking at it. And I don't believe in curtailing people's right to free speech. And I know that sometimes people say hateful things and it becomes difficult. But once you start to really try to curtail people's free speech under the auspices of, wait, this is hate speech, so we should not allow this, then you find society literally breaks down.
Yeah. And
there's a reason why in our Constitution, which has survived more than 240 years now, there's a reason why the First Amendment is free speech. And, you know, whether you support, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I'm just tired of the current system, the way that it is. And I believe there needs to be a mechanism for assembly. Mm-hmm. And I strongly believe this, and I believe that your data should be your data. You know, this whole idea that each one of us are utilizing free platforms like this one, we need to realize that whenever the software we're using is totally free, then actually you're the product. And that's one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about. And I think, you know, Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, I know a lot of people are going to have a lot of consternation over that. I think it's a good move, as long as he moves it towards a decentralized approach. Yeah. Which means that no one person can control it. And that's what we've built. We built a platform like that I don't have control over it. I couldn't see what you wrote if I wanted to. There's no way to. Because the entire thing is blockchain based and entirely, you know, decentralized. That means there's a decentralized mechanism for governance around it too. I'm also in healthcare companies. I have a company that we took public a few years ago called Evolus. I have another company called Aon Biopharma that's in the neurotoxin healthcare space as well, used to treat things like migraine headaches and such like that, cervical dystonia and other ailments that require kind of like nerve blocks. That's kind of an area that I've spent a lot of my career in. And then I also have a company called Alpheon Credit that I'm the founder of, that is the second largest healthcare consumer lender now in the country. And, we've done tons and tons of patients, consumers, for anything that they want, right? That's going to be on the elective side of things. And that's been a very, very successful business. And we've done it by focusing on the customer. And I have other companies, some in the clean tech, clean energy space. One of them is called Thrival Tech, which is very interesting. And that works on plasma reformation to separate hydrogen from methane, because methane is a more superior packing of spheres, right? Because if you try to store hydrogen, it takes up tons and tons of space. Whereas if you store it inside of methane molecules, you actually can compress it a ton and make it a lot easier to have access to, and then use the plasma reformation to separate the carbon from the hydrogen. And we have a company based in Colorado that does that, called Thrival Tech. We have another one called Blue On Energy, which is an air conditioning coolant replacement that meets all the standards of not only EPA, but the Montreal protocols that came in place. And, I could keep going. I won't bother because it'll bore everyone to tears. But the things that I spend my time on today that I love the most is probably Egypt, and probably my work in mathematics and geometry. We have a new book coming out called Polymath, which I just stopped from going to print very soon because I decided to add a whole section on perspective geometry. And this book is really intended to have people work alongside it. So there's going to be QR codes on each page, and you can actually watch the methods on YouTube on how to draw certain geometric forms. Because I believe that as we learn geometry, we raise our consciousness. And it literally comes in, geometry is like a QR code for our subconscious mind. It's decompressing this information and bringing it into our RAM, right? Which comparatively, you could say that what we're thinking about in our conscious mind is like RAM storage, right? Yeah. And as we expand to higher levels of consciousness, we're expanding our capacity for this type of information.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really kind of a cool concept. I haven't even thought about it until just now. But that's kind of the thing that I'm very excited about. I'm also working I just had a call with some patent attorneys on our new compression technologies, which are going to be, part of Crown Sterling and the like in our cryptography, as well as, just our data storage. We want to have a system of data storage that will be unassailable and super, super efficient and can compress data in the same way geometrically, right? It's using a geometric compression in effect to be able to compress data multiples of times more efficiently than what you see today with zip compressions. And in fact, you'd even be able to compress on top of zip. And you could compress numbers for the first time. It doesn't matter what type of data you have. Normally, mathematics and numbers can't be compressed. But when you use the methods that we've discovered and we've worked on, and part of it is discovery, that then you can't patent discovery, but you can patent methods off of that. And the reason I patent lots of stuff is because I don't want to be blocked from being able to use the methods that we've, been able to bring to light.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So I have a very active patent counsel and inside counsel as well. And our research teams work on this type of stuff day in and day out. And it was great to see our patent attorney on our latest method for compression. He's done tons of patents on this type of stuff before. And he was just laughing. He's like, wow, I can't believe how beautiful and simple this is.
Yeah, it's always the simplest ones, simplest things that are the most beautiful when it comes to mathematics. And I that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking about this. I mean, I thought about this a lot, but I was thinking about this even a bit more before our call, is that I was going to ask you about it's normally thought of as that, number is fundamental and that geometry kind of comes from this. But the more you think about it, it seems like you could say that geometry is almost fundamental to even numbers, but it's like co-generative at the same time. Because when you start actually building out something with quantities, you end up having to use geometry, like in your papers with your right triangles. It shows that there is a co-generation of quantity through the use of geometry, and that's what I really liked about your papers, is that it showed this relationship that is not, I don't think, thought about very much in the common academia, and the applications of it are endless. I mean, I even said to you when I read your paper, I was like, this is going to really help with predictions and using simulations, and that now you're saying that you were able to predict wind speeds of hurricanes, and that makes perfect sense. So it's very cool.
You know what's funny is these days I'm getting invited to give talks a lot, and I think the more I insult the current structures of things, because I'm an advocate for changing systems, the more I get invitations to speak. It's really funny. So I got up at the United Nations. I didn't post this because maybe I will at some stage, but maybe on my Telegram chat I will for sure. But I got up and literally told a story about how governments are lobbied today, and how here I am at the United Nations at the CEO summit. And one of the major topics was how governments are corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, newsflash, guys, our government's corrupt. It is what it is. Like get over it. It's like, and I thought it was going to be kind of this, wow, super surprising response from everybody, where everyone would be like, oh, no way. But you know what? Nobody disagreed. Yeah. Everyone just sort of like sat there, is like, okay, so what? Duh. It is what it is. And I was like stunned just by that, because like no one really laughed.
Yeah.
Right. And that tells you a lot.
They're so tied to it that for them, I feel like that's, I don't know how they would have reacted. It's a normal person, I think, would laugh, but someone involved in government, I don't know how they would react.
Well, I told a story about how when I was at Allergan, I was put in this unique situation. They wanted to tax Botox when I was president of Allergan Medical. And that was one of our major products. It was going to cost a fortune. And so we had to use our government lobby firms, right, to go back and have meetings with Senator Harry Reid and others. And we had to convince them that if they didn't vote down this concept of taxing Botox, which they were calling Botax at the time, then we would make sure he never got reelected. And this was totally legal. I'm not saying this is illegal. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's not corrupt.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing with all the lawyers and accounting firms. They set up all this complexity so that they can have a perpetual job act for themselves. And they want to make it more difficult, but here's how you basically have to pay them to get around these obstacles and challenges, right? That's the way business and government is set up today. I'm just being honest. Yeah. So I told the story how we said this, and Senator Reid says back to us, like, well, you have to give me a quid pro quo. You got to give me something else. Surely you've done some research to find if it's not going to be taxing Botox that's going to do it, or taxing, all of the elective procedures like LASIK surgery, et cetera, then what's it going to be? And I said, well, how about the tanning beds? Tanning beds, what do they do to help people? They hurt people. Yeah. Why don't you make a nationwide 10% sales tax on tanning beds? Now, there's never been a nationwide 10% sales tax on anything. There's never been a sales tax on anything nationwide. Okay. Sales taxes are administered at the local levels, right? At the state levels. And so he was like, wow. He goes, how large is the tanning bed lobby? I said, they're not organized. They don't have one. Yeah. Guess what? Can you find a tanning bed anymore?
I haven't looked, but I imagine it's made a difference.
You can get a spray paint job, right? But you can't get tanning beds anymore because they all went out of business. Now, do I feel bad? Well, not necessarily, because it wasn't necessarily a great business. And, definitely, there was some strong evidence scientifically that that's not something that people should be doing. Mm-hmm. But do I think it's right that that's the way that they should find their ignominious end, is by some pharma executive who comes up with a concept and says tax the tanning beds instead, and they woke up the next morning because they didn't have a lobby finding out that they have a 10% tax now? That's not right. That's not
Yeah.
fair. It's not equitable. But in Washington, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So we need to be savvy to this stuff. We need to understand it. And so the reason I get onto this is because your topic about geometry and mathematics and stuff is something that I just did this thing about. You may have seen it, where I was sitting here in my office 2 nights ago, and I was like, wait, I feel like all of the subjects are all just connected to each other.
Yeah.
Right? And what it says on here, I'll try to show this to you so you can see it, but it basically starts with mathematics up at the top, and then it says that's applied philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Geometry is applied mathematics, so it goes around this wheel. Geometry is applied mathematics. And then you've got applied geometry is what we call physics.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then applied physics is what we call chemistry.
Yeah.
And then applied chemistry is what we call biology. You see how they're all connected?
Yeah. They all
It's
build
a
on
wheel.
each other.
They're
Yeah.
all based on each other. So what we have separated into all these different disciplines is actually just an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really separate at all.
Yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
different facets of the same thing. So
So-
I think that, geometry, we know that it sits right next to the pineal gland
Mm-hmm.
and the pituitary glands. It's like the place that's close to where we think of as language as well. Language is a little bit more on the left brain. But geometry is very special because when you start drawing geometry, it's like you're putting a lot of electrical stimuli into this area inside the thalamus and the corpus callosum. So I just did a post on this today where I basically took a segment of something that I had done in Egypt and answered a question. Someone asked if you need DMT to be able to experience higher dimension. And I answered and said, you know what? You could definitely shortcut your way through DMT, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great for people that have done it, but that just hasn't been my path.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I've done psilocybin and I think that's pretty powerful too, but I've never done the DMT thing at all. I've never done ayahuasca either.
Yeah.
But what I have chosen as my path is geometry.
Yeah.
As I draw geometry, the more I draw geometry and getting specifically past the 3 challenges of geometry that were supposed to be impossible challenges, squaring the circle, trisecting the angle, and doubling the cube, and then going from there into all prime number polygons. How do you draw them perfectly? Well, guess what? Leonardo da Vinci left us a model for how to do it with his construction box. And I posted on it last year. And I am convinced that this, in combination with the breathing exercises and meditation effort, when you draw these things, your consciousness will inevitably rise.
Yeah.
You will go into another state and you release DMT. I talked to a person today who had a near-death experience. And when they had their near-death experience at the age of 24, they felt this euphoria. They saw the light. They had the experience like we all hear about. There's even a YouTube channel on near-death experiences. And she had this massive release of DMT right as she was dying. Now, ultimately, she didn't die. She ended up coming back. But she had such an experience. I talked to another guy who was dead for 5 days recently. Literally 5 days under a medically induced coma that they thought he was brain dead from. Completely brain dead. I have another friend, and they all tell the exact same stories. It's remarkable how similar the stories all are. They're like, look, yeah, there's life after death, and I was outside my body. I was looking down on my body.
Yeah.
And now what a great day and age we live in that we can actually watch these stories directly on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, we could never do that before.
Yeah.
But when I think about, this thing about these subjects, you brought up the topic, is mathematics or geometry first? I think I see it as a circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a circle. And
Yeah.
we can take that circle and expand it around our brains, in fact. And what if our brains were really just antenna?
Yeah.
And, just like when I was little, I used to play with my antenna to try to get it perfect, right, for watching a TV show. And then all the white noise would go away type of thing. And I'd have to use my body as part of the antenna. And then you barely, release it, and then it goes back to this terrible image. Well, what if our brains are like that, where we have tons of white noise, until we find the way to balance our antenna. And the way to balance our antenna is to actually learn all of these different subjects, because then we can have a balanced brain.
Yeah.
And if you study too much in one area, you might actually hurt your ability to act as an antenna.
Yep.
It's like being an athlete that only exercises one arm. You're not going to be a very good athlete.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're an arm wrestler. Maybe arm wrestlers want to do that. Who knows? But if you want to be a great athlete, balance is paramount. It's tantamount to all other things. And I think it's the same thing for the mental athlete.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this has been a major problem with the way that we have done schooling, and is that it's basically created multiple generations at this point of people who have only exercised one arm and one limb, and even then there's other issues with it where it's a memorization factory basically, and it's not, you have to learn how to learn. It's not, you can't be taught how to learn. I don't think you can. People can help you, but ultimately you have to you have to experience it. And but I think that the specialization of these fields has really held back any kind of scientific progress. And I think that polymaths are the people who are going to be the ones who push us past kind of almost like a dark ages that we're in, that you don't realize that you're in the dark ages while you're in the dark ages. It's only when you look back, you're like, wow, we weren't really making that much progress. But now there's like this renaissance happening, and I think that it's always the polymaths that take us into the renaissance, because they're the ones who are balanced and can connect all these different bits of knowledge in a wise fashion that leads to advances. So
It is beautiful, and when you look at it, I'm a fan of course, Leonardo da Vinci's work, but also Luca Pacioli. Luca Pacioli was the geometer that taught Da Vinci really how to be a geometer. And he also taught other Renaissance period polymaths, including Albrecht Dürer. And so when you really look at what are the common denominators of the Renaissance of the late 15th century, right, at the time of Leonardo's life in Florence and across Europe, actually, because Albrecht Dürer was the Da Vinci of Germany, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at it, the thing that emerged at the same time were two things. Hermeticism. All the Hermetic texts were all released in 1452, the year approximately that Da Vinci was born. Okay. They released from the Vatican libraries all the Hermetic texts, and they both did it in Rome, and they also did it in Constantinople. So they had this massive release of Hermetic text information that was then promulgated all throughout Europe. And that was right at the eve of the birth of, a lot of this Renaissance that occurred. The other thing that happened was you started seeing the emergence of perspective drawing and painting. I don't think it's a coincidence.
No, I was when I took one philosophy class in college, and it was because I had to. I was studying finance, and I just had to fill a requirement, and I didn't think I would like it, and it ended up becoming probably my favorite class that I took. And when you look at the definition of philosophy, everybody seems to say, it's the love of wisdom and something along those lines. But what my philosophy professor said to me, and I didn't realize that this wasn't commonly said until more recently, but he said that the definition of philosophy is the study of perspective. And I thought that was regardless of whether or not
I've never heard that, so thank you. That's a really cool definition I had not heard.
I had never heard it. I think it fits the definition of what philosophy should be more than what is the traditional definition. And it really makes me think about geometry a lot. It's just mental geometry, internal geometry, but it's like in the context of consciousness. And
well, it is interesting. I've been asked to speak at all these places recently. And last Friday, I spoke at ASU's LA campus. So they now have a campus in LA. It's this big building. It's really nice. And I was a keynote speaker for their 1 week of like presentations and everything for all their alumni, but also for the student body. And the thing that was most bizarre, like most bizarre, I mean, they had me there talking on a panel about futurism because I'm considered a futurist in some sense. But then they also had me speak after that. So I was surprised because I thought some reason I read my calendar wrong. I thought it was only one presentation. They had me give two. One was on a panel with the chief futurist of Paramount Pictures, right? And it's Paramount Corporation or whatever, which includes, MTV and all these different entertainment shops and houses within Hollywood. And then the second talk they had me give was moderated by the dean of the business school. And it was fascinating because he asked me a very interesting question. A lot of the topic of discussion was on metaverses and what does meta mean, right? Mm-hmm. Meta. So meta just means beyond in Greek. It's a Greek word, but I kind of laugh at it because I'm like me. Ta is Aleph Tav backwards.
Yeah.
Me, the Alpha Omega? Okay, that's pretty funny. And that means beyond, right? So, okay, beyond. So he asked me to draw the comparison between metaverses and Maya. Mm-hmm. Here I am speaking to this, student body, everything. It's like major, very official. I'm in the world. This is like kind of like the 3D world, right? Very much the 3D world. And he's asking me to talk about and draw comparisons to Maya. Maya, if you don't know, is a Hindu and Buddhistic term which references the illusion of life. So this was a deep metaphorical type question. And I answered him, of course, with a question, which is, why do you think we're not living in a metaverse right now?
Yeah, it's funny to me when people talk about like mind uploading and stuff, and then they talk about the simulation hypothesis in the same discussion. And it's like, okay, what do you think we're in almost? Is like,
I think, if you want my real opinion, after all of my study and work in this and trying to satisfy my own curiosity, I really believe that the concepts of Maya and Samadhi are real.
What is Samadhi?
So, so samsara would be like Maya, right? We're living in this cycle of samsara. Samadhi is when you can kind of achieve some degree of higher awareness leading toward enlightenment.
Okay.
So samadhi is when you have these moments of absolute oneness, mm-hmm. where you realize that the world around you is just a reflection of what's inside of you, and none of it is separate from you. So you see people and you have this incredible empathy, and you can put yourself entirely in their shoes, or even for animals or anything, even plants, it doesn't matter. The whole world around you becomes this blissful state, mm-hmm. where none of the current events or news impacts that for you. And I've had these moments of, and I've never talked about this before, but I've had moments of samadhi during meditation. I've had moments of samadhi during driving my car.
Yeah, I have those a lot.
Feel gratitude. It's like an intense feeling that overcomes you of gratitude, mm-hmm. and love and forgiveness, both for yourself and for everything and everyone else. And so when you start to experience that, at least my own personal experience has been, and of course, geometric practice, I call it meditative geometry because geometry is meditative for me. But in addition, kind of like the breathing techniques and living a mindful life, being aware of what's going on around you, start to notice the synchronicities. The more synchronicities you notice, the more you know that you're on the right path. This is the way the universe has a feedback mechanism to each and every one of us to tell us, yeah, you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Go for it, right? This is what you're doing. And this is you communicating, crossing that transom, that barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And when you can start to commingle those two consciousness, into one, then it becomes a super conscious mind. And those are moments that you experience samadhi.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels incredibly divine.
Yep.
So I believe that I tend to, take the perspective that we come here not to learn judgment. The construct of this world is judgment. We come here to learn to transcend that.
Mm-hmm.
We come here to learn that the way we transcend it is not by trying to escape planet Earth
Yep.
and its difficulties and its starvation and all the challenges and difficulties we all face, but rather to learn to fall in love with it.
Mm-hmm.
When we fall in love with it, then our mission here, which is, you could say that this whole world is like a consciousness expanding game.
Mm-hmm.
And we're playing this game so that we can raise our awareness and transcend. It's just like going through levels of a game in a way.
Yep.
And as we do this, when we start to fall in love with it and learn to laugh also with it,
yeah,
we start to realize then that the universe isn't happening to us, but it's happening for us.
Yeah.
That the universe that I thought was totally separate from me is really just the you inverse of me.
Yeah. I love that.
Every one of us has this. Every one of us has this because we're our own unique identifier. We have our own unique number. There's a number tied for each one of us that I believe we chose ultimately. Mm-hmm. So it changes all the context. When you start looking at your world, why did I go through all these difficulties? Why did I face this? Why did, this terrible thing happen to me or whatever? Maybe it's because I actually chose it. Maybe this was the path I wanted to experience. And maybe the classrooms of the future are not in some damp, dreary classroom environment where you're listening to somebody lecture on and drill on and on. Maybe it's living, experiencing what we're now experiencing here.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a classroom for us to learn to transcend through love.
Yeah.
And that when we do so, everything shifts around us. The more we feel scarce, the more we feel, oh, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need this, then all that will happen in the construct of this world is those things will become more elusive to you until we finally embody the feeling that we already have all the abundance we could ever want. Mm-hmm. The more moments of samadhi you experience, the more you will experience. The more synchronicities you experience, the more you will experience. Mm-hmm. It's a loop that continues on itself.
Yeah,
and it's self-reinforcing, and we're here to learn to love. We're not here to learn to judge. We're here to learn to love.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and because I think that there's people talk about the meaning crisis all the time, and I've thought a lot, especially since getting married and shortly before, like what is love and how to embody its being. And I think that ultimately it's like to do good for others, essentially, like to treat others the way that we would want our own to be treated, and that ultimately this is the way in which you can start to embody this. And I think a lot about also how if meaning comes from your ability to like perceive the truth ultimately, then if like perspective, you always start from one point and then you're like looking out. And so I think that
like an angle.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's very important for people to have goals, and because goals are like what that starting point is, that it helps you like perceive the rest of the world. And you can change your goal and you can see the world, from a different perspective, and change, your goal after you accomplish that one, ideally, like, and see the world from a different perspective. And then all throughout this, those goals should be ideally to, in different ways, and embrace like love, to do well for others. And
I believe that we're going through a major transformation right now. The first transformation is when we wake up to realize our own bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a major shock for me when I started thinking, wait, all the learning I'd done my whole life, maybe only just one perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And how many other perspectives are there? And I didn't even realize that maybe the entire time I was acting out of a subconscious position of whatever I believed would benefit me was my ethics. And maybe we all do this and we don't even realize we do it. Maybe what we all call as like from our own vantage point should be modified to say that it's really not a vantage point, rather it's an advantage point.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever benefits me becomes my only ethical choice. And unfortunately, I have to reconcile that. And that was the hardest part for me because I thought I'm really good at judgment. I came here when I was in my 30s and 40s, I thought, oh, I'm here to judge and learn to discern. And what's right and what's wrong. And when I was in my 20s, I remember telling my parents, you guys, why don't you just do the right thing? It's so simple. Everything was black and white. Everything was black and white. I tell you what, from the time I was 15 until like 25 years old, every year gradually, I mean, at 15, I thought my parents had like the lowest IQ on the planet. And then every year they gained back at least 10 points, right? And the next thing you know, by the time I'm 25, I'm like, man, my parents are genius.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they were changing. It was my own perspective and perception that was changing and evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I had to come to this realization of. It's really easy when we're younger to think everything is black and white. When actually you get older, you start realizing that we live in a world of grays all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to transcend it is just to learn to love.
Yeah, it's
and not just, and I'm not just saying love others, also how to receive love.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
A lot of people don't know how to even receive love.
Yep. You can even say that learning to receive love is also it's a way of loving yourself, but also a way of loving others even simultaneously, because to receive, goodness from others it's acknowledging of them and their meaning even. And so it's like I've noticed a lot that the more that you get deep into this, the more you see symmetries everywhere. That's definitely true. But also like superpositions where like you said at the beginning of this, is like the ultimate complexity is in simplicity. And it's interesting because I see this a lot in physics today, and the quest for unification in physics, and I don't even know if that's the right goal, but regardless, that is the normal goal. And it's interesting because this concept of superposition translates obviously over to physics, but also to everywhere. And it's this one of the statement that you said about complexity. The ultimate complexity or the simplicity is the ultimate complexity, is not understood by
the ultimate sophistication. Simplicity is the ultimate.
Okay, yeah. Sophistication. That's a better way of putting it. It's not acknowledged by physics, and I think that a lot of the problems that we face, not just in physics, but in tech and in government even, and socially and biology, and all the different fields as you go around the wheel, is that these problems are really probably very simple to solve as long as you are perceiving the right problem. But we're purposely looking for the most complex solutions for some reason. And that doesn't make sense to me, because if you're trying to get as fundamental as you possibly can, like the math should get really, really simple, because, if you go to the very beginning, all that exists is one. So there is no even quantities at that point. So as you get closer to that point, like you should get simpler and simpler and simpler, and also more and more sophisticated and elegant. So
this is why, my whole approach to this and our research team's work has really been around the simplicity of the divisions of the number one.
Yeah.
X and 1 over X. That's why I made a whole TV show about this. The code X. You're the X.
Yeah.
This is all about you remembering who you are and having mechanisms of some structure to a degree to help you find that pathway to remember who you are and realize that, you know, maybe the number you chose, your numerology or your zodiac sign, has had a much bigger role in determining the life you've lived. Much bigger. You know, I always thought, oh, it was from the sweat of my brow that I was successful in business and work. Maybe it's just because I was born a Taurus. I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And here I am patting myself on the back saying, geez, well done. But then along with that, let's say there's a number. That means there's a 1 over X of that value that has a long period in it. The period is a repetitive pattern.
Mm-hmm.
We all experience these repetitive patterns in our lives, don't we? Until we find our own golden ratio. And each of us has a golden ratio where we can actually, just like the golden number, have a mantissa or a decimal extension that's identical to its reciprocal value. You can actually do that. Every one of us has the ability to do this. And I call this, if you're interested in this, monadicity, that it's a return to oneness. Everything can return us to oneness, and that there is actually a relationship that you can find for every number where it can multiply back into itself with the exact same number, excluding the mask of its conscious mind. So, for example, 432 has a 1 over X of 0.0023148, and that 148 repeats infinitely, right?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And so now, let's say I put 432 0.0023148. Now I've combined the conscious mind and the subconscious mind into one. But if I take its 1 over X, it will be similar for the first few numbers, and then it will no longer be similar. I want it to be infinitely the same.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that, I have to take that number, square it, the 432, square it, add 1, and then take its square root. And then I'm going to get that number, and then I take the left of the decimal position and double that, and then I take that 1 over X value, and it's going to give me a perfect mantissa that's irrational, infinite irrational.
That's amazing.
That is just like the golden ratio. So every one of us, doesn't matter what your number is, has a golden ratio. We just have to find that golden ratio. And this is the moment we extend into the superconscious mind, that we can achieve the superconscious mind, where our conscious mind and our subconscious mind become in balance with each other.
Mm-hmm.
The reflection and the absorption become in balance with each other. And this goes straight to the Bohr atom model, right? Of why hydrogen, we know it has certain wavelengths of expression of light. And those were immediately predictable through X and 1 over X analysis of the Bohr atom model. It's the Rydberg constant that gets us there. I think it can be done with all elements in the periodic wave of elements. I don't like to use the term table of elements because it's a wave.
It's a wave. Yeah,
it's a wave of expression. And I think that this is why the world right now is all looking inward to a certain extent, and why so many people also feel like really disenfranchised, right? The awakening process people are going through is not easy. It's not easy because you're breaking down. It's like what Yoda said in Star Wars. You must unlearn what you have learned. Remember that one scene where Yoda, like in Empire Strikes Back, you've got Luke Skywalker says, "Master, I can't lift it out." He's got his X-Fighter. He's trying to get out of the swamp, and he can't get it out of the swamp. So he comes over, he's like, "Master, it's too large. It's impossible. It's impossible." And then next thing you know, Yoda goes like this, lifts up the X-Fighter out of the swamp, puts it on dry ground, and then Luke Skywalker runs over to him and says, "How'd you do that? That's impossible." And of course, Yoda looks at me and says, "That is why you fail."
Yeah, you need to increase your RAM.
That's right. If you think you can or you think you can't, you'll be right.
Yeah.
This is the nature of this U-inverse. And until we realize that we're in these repetition patterns and that we're seeing things only the same way, and we're not opening to listening to other people's perspectives and learning from them and integrating them, then we're not increasing our RAM. We're not able to balance our antenna to get more and have a higher order experience. I'm telling you, there are people on this planet right now that are living blissful lives.
Mhm.
Blissful lives. It's a matter of our choice.
Yeah.
Very often. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I know people that have been, you know, one of my favorite quotes is by Helen Keller. And you know the story of Helen Keller, right? She was quadriplegic, she was blind and deaf, and yet she had such a massive impact on the world. So every time I think about how life gave me a raw deck sometimes, right? And I've faced my own challenges. Trust me, I have. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
I think about, though, her quote, which is the only thing worse than blindness is to have sight without vision.
Yeah. Then
What
you're
does that tell us? I mean, like, what a profound comment from a person who's blind. I mean, of all the things you would like, losing your sight has got to be like terrible, because it's such a big part of who I am.
Yeah, me too.
But the only thing worse than blindness is to have sight without vision. Wow. That's a freaking profound comment.
Yep.
Who am I? And then we all see these videos of people that are, you know, paraplegic or quadriplegic, just doing incredible things, overcoming all the odds.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to sit there and say, oh, I can't do it, I'm just going to sit on my couch. Come on.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah. I mean, we have the challenges that we have for the sake of, like you said, it's of learning. It's a consciousness expanding environment. It's that's the point. That's the point of, you know, part of the point, at least, of what why we are here. And I think that it is true that at least the super consciousness that we are part of, you know, you could call it God within you, that you are tied to, whatever terminology, you know, fits best with your experience, but that super consciousness that is part of you did choose for you to have, you know, the perspective that you at least enter with, and the challenges that you have for a reason. They're there, you know, to teach us.
It's
as
all
hard as they
here to
definitely
teach
be.
us.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing that I'm hoping, and I had a very heartwarming message today from a guy who's been following my work for a long time, and he's like, ever since I started following your work, I've changed my perspective on so many things in life. And one of them was how he looked at mathematics, which is something that so many people love to hate, right? Let's face it. Like, math is not exactly the most popular subject.
Yeah.
So only to that one nerdy kid that was like, I know the answer every time, right? Then it's like you just have another image in your mind of like, oh gosh, another math class, no thanks. But when we change our perspective and see mathematics for what I know that it is, the language of God,
mm-hmm.
everything shifts.
Yeah.
And God is not some separate guy from us. God is not some old white dude or old black dude. It's not some dude. It's the entire universe. We're living in God. This is God.
Yeah.
And this is heaven, if we so choose to experience it that.
Yeah.
But we don't choose that because we still get stuck on perceiving the world as being against us. And we look at the world through our own lens of bias that we have chosen. And I know it's hard for people to say, oh, so wait a minute, does that mean that people that are starving chose starving? And I think the answer to that question is yes. Not in this conscious mind, no. But in the context of what they wanted to come and learn and experience, that's how much I believe this. Mm-hmm. I really do.
Yeah.
I believe that every single thing I faced, every challenge, every difficulty, every bone-crushing, travesty I've ever experienced was exactly of my own choosing. And not just as a consequence through karma of my actions. A direct consequence, I believe, of my choosing, like a menu, all of it.
Yeah.
And that gives me great solace. And it also wakes me up to what I need to do for the rest of my life and what I want to do for the rest of my life. I'm no longer living someone else's script because I realized that someone else was always me.
Yeah.
And
Makes
that's
sense.
why I'm like going for doing whatever I want to do now that brings me joy. And that's why I like to share these things with people, because it does bring me joy to see others. I don't mind that they disagree with me. It doesn't bother me at all. I like that they don't agree with me. There have been many times that people have disagreed with me and changed my thinking on things. I appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. But I am just grateful for having the opportunity to be here to learn, to start off with the lens of only one perspective, so that I can learn to expand those perspectives through the sum total of all my actions, and maybe realize that the whole truth is the sum of all perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that word joy. I had someone who has become a friend of mine. I focus a lot on my live streams talking about marriage, and he had told me that he was very impacted by watching this, and ended up getting married and inviting me to his wedding. And I went, and his dad made a speech, and he was saying that joy. He was saying, I'm wishing you both a joyous life, not necessarily a happy life, but a joyous life. And I thought it made me think so deeply about like what is joy, and it's kind of like, so far I think it's like the intersection between meaning and gratitude. It's like you're grateful to be where you are, and you feel like it makes an impact almost, which is going to intrinsically lead to at least some degree of happy feelings or positive feelings at least. I've been thinking a lot about that word lately, joy, and I think it's very deep. There's a lot to it.
You know, someone just asked, like, how can you prove that people that are starving maybe chose it before they came here? Right? How can you prove that? My comment back to that would be, first of all, there's nothing you can prove when we're crossing these two transoms of experience.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
nothing you can prove. You can't prove it's not. You can't prove it's not. In the ancient texts, however, because I turn to these, you know, in the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see, and actually I have many Indian friends who tell me this all the time. I'm like, why do you tolerate the caste system? Isn't that just wrong? I mean, I don't like the caste system. Right? Everybody should be equal. I personally believe that nobody's any better or any worse than anybody else, ever.
Yeah.
I don't believe my words are more important than anyone else's words ever. It doesn't matter how large the platform I'm standing on. Mm-hmm. Everyone has the right to express their viewpoint.
Yep.
And I believe that governments exist so that people can express those viewpoints. Mm-hmm. So I can learn from those viewpoints. I see it as an opportunity to learn and expand consciousness. But when you talk to some people that are in the caste systems in India, and I think it's a good example of this. I remember asking my partner Vic, I'm like, why is there the caste system? What's the rationale for this caste system? He goes, well, actually, some people very strongly believe that whatever you're living, that experience, like if you decided you're going to come back as a grasshopper, then you're going to live that experience as a grasshopper. And that's the experience that you wanted to live. So why get in the way of them living it? Whatever it is, you might decide that you want to experience what it's like to be a successful person in acting or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Or you might decide that you want to have the experience of suffering and difficulty so that you can learn to transcend through a different means. And probably all of us have all experienced different types of things like this in many myriad lifetimes.
Yeah.
As we go through this same cycles over and over and over again. Who's to say that the 1 over X number we have, that's this gigantic period, isn't necessarily marking the end of a lifetime and then beginning another one? Or maybe you get a whole nother number. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. But what I do know is this. I can only speak for myself personally. Every single experience I've had, I chose. So that means the abundance that I've experienced, the moments of difficulty and scarcity I experienced, all of these things were things that I chose. I know I chose it. So I can't prove that other people chose otherwise. I mean, is there a system to make sure that what people chose is actually what they got? Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
There's no way to prove that, but
there's no way to
that's-
prove that. There's no way to prove it, but I fundamentally believe it.
Yeah.
And I also believe that the more we judge, the more we will experience the thing we judge.
Mm-hmm. That's
The
definitely.
more we judge negatively. So, and I can quantify this very likely, right? So there is something called the Rosenthal effect, where this research team basically went to these teachers and said, okay, we're going to do tests on all the kids in the class to make sure that these kids are, you know, they're going to have IQ tests, and we're going to find out which ones are genius level and which ones are not. And you can't tell the students, and we're not going to tell the students. And the study was over a year, because they were going to do a test at the beginning and a test at the end. And at the beginning, they tested, and they found that 5 students were genius. So they told the teacher, these are the 5 genius students, and don't treat them any differently.
Mm-hmm.
So the teacher didn't treat them any differently, and she was monitored on camera and everything. And so there was no information given to the children or the children's parents that the children were genius level. And then they came back at the end of the year to test the students, and lo and behold, the same 5 students tested genius level.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the subject of the research. The true subject of the research was that when they tested all the students at the beginning of the year, none of them were genius level. They lied to the teacher and told the teacher 5 were genius. The expectation that the teacher had of them being genius actually resulted in them being tested as genius.
Yeah.
Now, these subtle level expectations is what we experience. So when you judge something, right, you will judge that thing, and that thing will keep propagating back to you. It's like I'm a hammer, and then I'm looking for nails to hit.
Yeah.
And so every time, you know, I'm only going to, if I try to put effort into that, I might improve it in a small way, but I'm just going to keep hearing more and more and seeing more and more of all this deforestation around the world.
Yeah.
Because what we attract is what we judge until we no longer judge what we attracted.
Yeah.
This I know. So if you're trying to constantly fix something in the world, you'll only continue to be confronted with that thing.
Yeah, you're
If
controlled by
instead you
it.
change your perception and look at the world differently, see the abundance, see the beauty. You know, at the end of his life, I met with Shimon Peres, and I'd met him once in 2007. I met him again in 2015, and he came to California, and he asked me to have a meeting with him. I met with him in his hotel room, and I asked him, as you look back on your life, what are you most proud of? You know what he said? He said, Robert, the thing I'm most proud of is I don't look back. And I was like, wow, that's really profound. And he goes, let me give you some advice. Be an optimist. Statues will never be erected for pessimists.
Yep.
And pessimists will never call themselves pessimists. They'll refer to themselves as realists.
Mm-hmm.
So if you refer to yourself as a realist, start looking at the world differently and change your world.
Yeah.
Change your experience. And you can sit there and convince yourself, and by the way, if you think you can and you think you can't, you'll be right. If you're a pessimist or a realist, because pessimists never call themselves pessimists.
Yeah, no, they don't.
Then, and by the way, if that's how you know they're pessimists, if they call themselves realists, just FYI.
Yeah.
Okay. Then change your perception and try to see the beauty in the world around you. There's always a silver lining. It's like the Ronald Reagan used to tell this story about 2 little boys. One was an optimist, the other's a pessimist. And the parents were worried about the pessimistic boy, so they hired a psychiatrist to come and do an analysis on them, and the psychiatrist said, I'm going to do this test on Christmas morning. I'm going to set up 2 different rooms for your 2 boys, and I'm going to test them to see how they react to this. So in one room, we put all the best toys, all the greatest stuff, the G.I. Joe with the grip, the Eagle Eye Vision, and all this stuff, and Legos, and, you know, erector sets, whole 9 yards, everything a 5-6-year-old boy would want. In the other room, he fills it full of horse manure. It's actually outside the house, next to like kind of a shed or a barn area. So he takes the first little boy, who's the pessimist, to the room full of all the great toys. He opens the door and he says, all of this is yours, Merry Christmas. And the little boy bursts into tears. And he's like, what's wrong? And he's like, all these toys are going to be broken. I'm going to lose them all. My friends are going to steal some of them, and then I'll be really sad. The guy's like, wow, that was a downer. So he takes the other little boy, the optimist, outside, walks him outside, goes out to the, past the outhouse, out to the shed, opens the shed door, and it's full of manure. And the little boy jumps up and down. He's so happy. And he says, "Why are you so happy?" He says, "Well, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere."
Makes sense.
People will think that the optimists are delusional, but guess what? The optimists are happy.
The optimists are right too, I think. My wife and I often say whenever we're having some trouble on anything, and it's like if some things are happening that are unfortunate, we'll remind each other, if it doesn't look like it's working out, then it's not the end. And I think a lot about like even the standard model, and you look at the quarks, and when you get down to the it starts with up and down, and then it goes to strange and charm, and then it goes to truth and beauty. And I think about how these are like two sides of one coin of reality, and the closer you get to truth, the more you get beauty too. The more beautiful something is, the truer it is. And so the pessimist is wrong. They're not. It's not even just that they're unhappy. It's that I also think it's incorrect. There is an abundance. I think scarcity is it's a limited perspective.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing with fear. We know that when people are experiencing fear, they lose IQ.
Yeah.
Period. So this idea that, people are wrong or right or whatever, I guess my answer would be, it depends on your perspective. And that's so difficult for people to grasp. But if you really want to transcend this experience and start living a life of bliss, you got to do it.
Yeah.
You got to do it. You got to start seeing the world in the light of love and not in the light of hate.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, and the way you do that is by accepting that there are people, that there are things, that every action has an equal opposite reaction. We could not have a world without the context of pain so that we can understand pleasure.
Yeah.
Period. And usually the thing that brings us that thing that we want to separate from the most is anything that brings us shame. It goes right back to the Garden of Eden. And, God comes down and says, "Hey, Adam, where art thou?" Adam, being ashamed, covers himself, right, with fig leaves. The first reference is like being ashamed. Well, why is he ashamed? What hast thou done? Oh, I ate of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Or the woman that thou gavest me, and commanded that I should remain with her. She gave me of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and I did eat. Eve, what hast thou done? Oh, the serpent beguiled me, and I ate. Wait a minute. So the first thing we do when we feel shame for anything is we blame. Yeah. It's somebody else's fault. That woman that you gave me, or that serpent that showed up in the garden, they're the ones that made me do it. Isn't that funny? And then we start separating ourselves out and saying, I am not that. I am only this.
Yep.
And that's when the journey begins. By making these separations of ourselves, we are forming our own persona, creating our own mask. And the word persona actually means mask in Latin. We're forming our separation and our persona, and we're separating ourselves from the rest of the world around us until we get to our 30s or 40s or 50s and have a midlife crisis. And then we realize, wait a minute, I chose this all along.
Yeah.
And the higher awareness we get to, the more we start to remember. Yeah. And that's the beauty of geometry. And that's why it's such a meditative practice. And you have to learn, we all have to learn how to shield ourselves from the craziness that can easily lead us down more pathways of judgment that then only result in more experience of the thing I was judging.
Yeah, this is so critical. This is why I try and really focus on setting a goal, because otherwise you're just letting everything happen to you, and that's when it starts being easy to blame others for everything instead of focusing on the fact that You know, we're here and it's not even we're interacting with the environment or the environment is acting on us. It's like it's an interactive environment. It's a relationship, and that if you don't have, if you're not setting your own intentions, then you're not living your life, essentially. You're just letting others determine what you should be doing, and
Yeah, I mean,
that doesn't help.
I think the best way goes back to what Gandhi said, right? It's like, be the change that you wish to see in the world.
Mm.
Start embodying the way that you would like to see the world. It's so funny. I get people that think I'm Freemason. They think I'm Illuminati. They got all these things, and they go on my page and they're like, yo, dude, like, either you're Luciferian or something like that. I'm like, oh, okay, okay. So then I look at their page, and what's their profile picture of? A demon.
Yeah.
It's usually a demon. Almost always, it's like some weird demon shit, right? It's like, what the hell? And the funny thing is, I know it's not separate from me.
Yeah.
That's just a little test for me to go, okay, there you go. I am what I judge. We don't see the world as it is, rather we see it as we are.
Yeah.
And that's an explanation for Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and everything else with quantum erasers and double slit phenomenon.
Yeah.
We see the world as we are.
Yeah. You can't separate, perspective, personal perspective of consciousness from an observation at all. It is the same thing. I don't know why people think that, but you can't.
Yeah, I'll say one thing. The people that are into Antifa, right, which kind of made me laugh. Whenever I see someone who names themselves after what they are not, it's like the extreme end of narcissism, right?
Yeah.
So sorry to all the Antifa people out there, but the truth is this. It's a circle, right? What we think is a linear line, we have to flip this way and see that it's actually a circle. Mm-hmm. And what you can say then is that if I go too far left, I'll end up far right. That's why every major despotic tyrant that's ever existed since the last 200 years have run on platforms that have been leftist ideologies, far left, far left. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat, neither. So the interesting part is, though, you've got Kim Jong-il, right? Kim Jong-un. You've got Hitler. I mean, we could go through a list of all the despotic rulers that have existed in the last 100 or so years. And what you're going to find is they all of them to a person, even people that you would consider, like Castro. Mm-hmm. They all ran on communist principle. Mm-hmm. Every one of them. And yet, it's like this concept of everyone's equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, and, I'm not a fan of parasitic capitalism. Mm-hmm. I don't like parasitic capitalism. I believe our system is messed up because it's too focused on earnings per share growth. And that's the pain as to why everything gets more expensive. That's the pain as to why everything becomes lesser quality because they're trying to cut costs. I think it's the wrong mechanism. I think Wall Street should be forced to own equities, right? If you're going to buy into something, you've got to hold it for at least some minimum hold period. This like playing in and out on arbitrage opportunity, I think is just not good for business, not good for anyone. It leads corporations to have rapid management changes where CEOs have average tenures of 18 months. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we have parasitic profits versus purpose-driven.
Exactly.
So, but I don't think that capitalism is, let's toss it all out and then let's go to this idea of Kim Jong-il, Hitler, or Castro, which says, okay, I'm your father. I'm going to give you a meal. You're going to get rice and you're going to get beef stew.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
And give me everything.
Yeah.
Give me everything. And the reason you know that it's a fascist regime, even though they call it communist, is because the picture of the father, the supreme leader, is everywhere on giant billboards. I've been to countries like that. So whenever people tell me they're Antifa, I'm actually thinking, oh, shit.
Yeah.
That's like the ultimate. They're the fascists.
Yeah. You can't, I talk about this too all the time, is if you define yourself by what you're against, then you're still defined by it. Yeah, you can't not be that thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is they don't even understand that. But there's not, here's the other aspect of this. It's all emanating from us.
Mm-hmm.
If we get our internal aspects right, our experience in this world will be in balance.
Yeah.
But in order to recognize this, we have to be comfortable with the idea that there is darkness.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be, it doesn't mean that we're going to go and pat the sinner on the back, but it does mean we love the sinner.
Yeah.
And whatever that sin is, right? Because that's subjective too. It's entirely subjective. Going through the awakening process is to understand the role that you have played in your own decisions that have been bias driven, without even realizing that you had biases, whatever those biases are. Right? You can have biases on both sides of the equation, right? Like there's racial biases. And I'll give you an example of a racial bias that I experienced. When I was in New Orleans, I remember when I was a kid. So I was 5 years old, and I lived in Louisiana for a few years before we moved to England. And this was during segregation, so this is the early 70s. And I got bused to an all-black school, right? So here I was, white kid, part Asian, who gets bused to an all-black school. And I'm in line, I'm in like first grade or something. And this guy had this gigantic afro. Like, it was a massive afro. And I just thought, like a little kid, I'm like, I wonder what that feels like. I just want to touch it, right? Because this is like little kids who are curious. I mean, nobody told me don't try to touch it, but I was like, it was so big. I was like, just want to touch it. Of course, that got my ass kicked.
Yeah.
So I got my ass kicked when I'm 6 years old by a group of kids who thought that that was offensive, but I meant no offense by it. I was just curious as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fast forward 30 years. I'm walking through the streets of New Orleans. And I'm, on Bourbon Street, but I decide to kind of go down Canal and take a back street. And I go down that street, and it's like full of people like doing crack and all kinds of stuff, right? Of course, New Orleans, one of the more dangerous cities in the United States.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm going to go down this alleyway. I think I'm going to do an about face and hightail it out of there, right? So I do. During Black Lives Matter, I remember thinking to myself, do I have any biases introspectively that I am unconscious of? And I remember thinking about that because I have plenty of Black friends, plenty, tons, in fact. I'd say at least probably 40 or 50, like almost half of my friends would probably be Black, I would say. But I had to really come to terms with my own sort of bias that I'd accumulated, that I didn't want to walk down an alleyway. Now, you could argue if I saw a bunch of guys doing crack, down an alleyway that were all white, I might have turned around and not gone down that alleyway. But there is some thought in my mind that says maybe if they were all white, I would have been less fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to come to terms with that. It was not an easy thing for me to come to terms with.
Yeah.
And we all get stuck in these conditioning biases and self-limiting beliefs as well. The more pernicious aspects of this are actually the things that we believe are limitations that we place on ourselves and what we can do, achieve, and be. Mm-hmm. So, this idea that maybe all of the obstacles that I perceive in my world are self-imposed. Maybe I'm my own worst enemy. Maybe I'm also my greatest hero, but maybe I'm also my own worst enemy. And maybe if I can learn to integrate and understand myself better, then I will be able to overcome some of these self-imposed narratives. People speak of themselves negatively all the time. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
It serves you nothing.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. I mean, some people think it's like self-deprecating and everything, and it's sort of funny, and comedians do it well and everything. Dude, don't do it. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts become words. Your words become actions. Mm-hmm. And your actions become the world experiences you have.
Yep.
So realize that there's a connection between all of these things. And the only real obstacles that we face I can tell you, as sure as I'm sitting here right now, the only real obstacles that we face are the ones we allow ourselves to believe in.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that subject to a limitation here or with some sort of like boilerplate, disclaimer. I mean it sincerely across the board. The only real obstacles we face are the ones we allow ourselves to believe in.
Mm-hmm. Or the limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. The boundaries, the limits.
Mm-hmm.
So as we raise our consciousness and we can expand our RAM storage, right?
Yep.
Through that, then we're going to decompress the geometric compressions that are all around us and have ready access to that information that allows us to be able to synthesize many, many perspectives, not only the one that we had been accustomed to.
Yeah.
And this is a higher awareness, and that also expands our ability to have empathy. It expands our ability to forgive. It expands our ability to love. And we can only love people around us to the same degree that we allow ourselves to love ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you so much. You have one last question, and I've got to run to another meeting. But
no, I mean, there's definitely next time we should do this again. I'd love to talk more about Egypt and prime numbers. And I know both of those topics.
Well, I've got a little more time if you want to go on prime numbers. I can do
Okay.
about 10 more minutes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I would definitely like to talk about prime numbers. I think I had an idea that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and I've been just studying prime numbers for a couple of years now. I have like the first primes to 1,000,000 on my Excel, and I'm always like looking for symmetry patterns and stuff on there. And one of the things that I think about a lot is how how primes might be related to consciousness, and that you are one and you are yourself, and it means like you're only divisible by one and yourself. And so primes are also one and divisible by themselves, and it kind of has led to me trying to construct and making some progress on it, I think, of a model of how this could relate to consciousness. And I just wanted your general thoughts on it. We could talk more specifically about it at a later time, but I just wanted your general thoughts on how.
Well, what's interesting, I think the place I'd like to start with is that, one of the discoveries I made earlier this year, and I just haven't had a chance yet to write it in a paper yet, is that there is probably a real value for the square root of -1.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, what the heck does it have to do with prime numbers, Robert? Please. Well, actually everything.
Yeah.
The reason it does is because when you look at the distribution of prime numbers, the first, 10 integers, we have 2, 3, 5, and 7. So there's 4 prime numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And normally 1 is not counted as prime, although arguably it should be the primo, right? The primus inter pares, the prime of primes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Optimus prime.
I think about that all the time too.
Right. And I can tell you, I can prove to you that it is actually a prime number.
It's definitely a prime number.
And here's how. Okay. But let me just keep on this line of thinking. So the first 10 integers has 4 primes. The first 100 integers has 25 primes. Okay. The first 1,000 integers has 168 primes. And it goes out from there. So that means in the first 10 integers, 40% are prime. In the first 100 integers, 25% are prime. And by the 1,000th integer, only 16.8% are prime.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So as you go farther and farther out in the number series, the number of primes does not increase at the same exponential rate as the linear series of numbers do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how does this work then? Because if we're going to use Euler as the base logarithm value to determine the number of prime numbers, because it tends to work, particularly when you get out pretty far in the number series, you get, it should be X number of primes, right? It would tell you in the earlier sets of numbers, the wrong numbers altogether. So if you use the Euler number, natural log, to assume that the number of prime numbers should be exactly what the natural log tells us, in the first 1,000 integers, there should be only 144.7 primes. That's a pretty big delta from 144.7 to 168. What's up with that?
Yeah.
And it would also then tell you that the number of primes in the first 100 integers is only 21.7, not 25. So still a pretty big delta.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the first 10 and it tells you 4. So it's correct all of a sudden.
Okay.
But not really. Here's why. Because the Euler number is an asymptote.
Yep.
It converges to this infinite irrational number, but just like the golden ratio with Fibonacci series, each additional decimal digit will give you a greater degree of accuracy. So if I start with 1 plus 1 equals 2, and then 2 plus 1 equals 3, and then I'm going to extend that Fibonacci series, and then 3 plus 2 equals 5, and then 5 plus 3 equals 8, and then I've got 13, and then 21, and then 34, and then 55, and then 89, and 144, and 233, and 377. Right? These are all the numbers in the Fibonacci series. I have to get all the way out to 144 divided by 89 to get to 1.618.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it's like 1.625,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not quite. It's like this wide band of a sine-cosine relationship that's getting ever closer to the perfection of 1.61803398887 infinite,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, the same thing is true with the asymptote of the Euler number. It converges to this perfect transcendental irrational number, but the beginning of that number, the top of the graph, is not actually 2.718. It's a number larger than 2.718. And guess what that number is?
I don't know.
3.16227766, which is the square root of 10.
Okay.
Okay? Now, why is that number unique? Very, very unique number. And it's actually, when we use that number and we then apply it, how many primes do we get in the first 1,000 integers? We get 167. We're only one away from the actual value. And you'd expect some degree of variation. In the first 100 integers, we end up with 25. And in the first 10 integers, we end up with 5.
Okay.
So what's the other prime number in the first 10 integers?
1.
The number 1.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so you have to start the graph at 3.6, 3.16227766, and then it starts to fall from there with each of the extra iterations. And then by the time you get out into the trillions, you're starting to converge closer and closer towards Euler, but you're still pretty far from Euler. Mm-hmm. So for the first, 12 digits of expression, 10 to the 12th power, you're better off using the square root of 10 as your natural log. It's not actually the natural log. So this tells us something about the base 10 numbering system, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That it's fundamental.
Yeah.
It also tells me something about the imaginary plane. Because only this number, the square root of 10, has the capacity to be able to inverse square itself. What the heck do I mean by that? So if you take the square root of 10, like the golden ratio, if you take its inverse value, it is similar in that all the numbers are the same, except unlike the golden ratio where the number 1 would go away. So 1.618 inverted, right? 1 over 1.618 equals 0.618. And then all the other numbers are the same. So the 1 is the toggle back and forth between the inverse equation of it.
Mm-hmm.
The square root of 10 doesn't do that. It just moves a decimal position.
Yeah.
So 3.16 square root of 10 inverted, so to the power, square root of 10 to the power of -1 equals 0.316. So the exact same number infinitely.
Mm-hmm.
And this, we believe, is...
Oh no, did it cut out? I don't know if you can hear me, but you paused. Let me know in the chat if anybody else can see Robert Grant. Yeah, no, it's oh man, glitched out. Okay, well, we'll give him a chance to see if he can join back quickly, but yeah, he probably got a call. But if not, then we'll see how this ends. But it might end like this, it might not. But that was an incredible conversation, even if this is the way that it ends. But I mean, we'll give him a chance to see if he can rejoin. But prime numbers, it's fascinating to listen to what he's saying. I see these same patterns when I start graphing out prime numbers. You can see the convergence points that it leads to. We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if he can rejoin. I hope his phone didn't die. But yeah, this was an awesome conversation. Yeah, Illuminati stopped him from giving away the secrets. The secrets are accessible to everybody. Nobody needs to give them away. They're there for you to access. They're not secrets. You have to be in the mindset that allows you to perceive those truths. It's not that, let's see here. Your request. Okay, accept. Okay, hopefully this works. Oh,
Hey,
there we go.
sorry, I don't know what happened. My phone just crashed. It was the weirdest thing. Okay, so
sometimes
I
that
left
happens at
everyone
weird
on a
moments.
cliffhanger now. It's like everyone's dying, I'm sure, to figure out what the heck I was going to say next. No, I'm kidding. But,
no, it left right at a cliffhanger. It was like,
it was a cliffhanger. Okay, yeah. So where was I? So I was
saying that it had showed what you had determined from looking at this pattern. And then it froze.
That's right. Yes, that's right. So 1 over 3.16 or 3.16 to the power of negative 1, which is the inverse.
Okay.
Are you there? I lose you?
No, we're
back.
Okay. Yep, you're back.
So 3.16 to the power of negative 1 is just 0.316, right? And it's the same expression infinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at Euler's identity equation, right? I think I sent this to you.
Mm-hmm.
Euler's identity is e to the I plus 1 equals 0. Did I lose you again?
Yeah, for 1 second. Somebody doesn't want you to reveal these secrets, someone said in the chat.
Like, what the heck? You have to find me on Telegram then.
Yeah.
But
it's back now.
So,
yeah.
So 3.16 to the power. Am I back now? Am I back?
Yep.
Yes. Good.
Yep.
Okay, good. So 3.16 to the power of negative 1 equals 0.316 with an infinite expression that's identical to its inverse. Okay. So if you look at Euler's identity, e to the I pi plus 1 equals 0, then you have to kind of say, what is this really trying to tell us? What's it really trying to say? E to the I pi plus 1 equals 0? Okay. So what if we use this idea that the only number that can have an infinitely identical expression to itself is the square root of 10 and multiplying it by the square root of 10 to the power of negative 1. And if we look at Euler's definitions, right? So this is Leonhard Euler, right? His definitions say that n to the negative 1 is equal to negative n. So it implies a polarity flip.
Mm-hmm.
So black holes and white holes, right, are considered, if you follow that theory, to be on one side, the golden ratio, on the other side, the golden ratio minus 1, or 1 over the golden ratio, which is the same number, right? 1 over the golden ratio. So there would likely then be a polarity flip, just as we have an electron that has a negative charge and a positron that has a positive charge. And when the two annihilate each other, which is going to prove information theory to be correct, and information theory's basis is geometry.
Yeah, it has to be.
And it is, so geometry is actually going to be, in my opinion, the fifth state of matter. Because it's coherence of that geometry that we call information. And it doesn't always have to be coherent. It can be random too, but I don't really believe in randomness. It's just a pattern yet perceived.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So basically, what I found was that only the square root of 10 could have a value that's reciprocal value. So the square root of 10 to the power of -1 is equal to negative, right? So if it's the power of -1, then it's basically going to have a negative value of -0.316227766. So therefore, when you reciprocal square it, its result will be negative. So 3.16227766 multiplied by -0.316227766, just following Euler's parameters, equals -1. And guess what? It works at every single scale for every single number.
That
It
makes a
creates
lot of sense.
tesseracts.
Yeah, that
It
makes a
creates
lot of
tesseracts.
sense.
And a tesseract, so I could take, what's the square root of -25? Well, it happens to be 15.8 with some decimal extension behind it, multiplied by, 1.58, which is negative. And you divide that by the square root of 10, and you'll come back to its regular forms, right? Which is just going to be 5. So this works at all scales. It just makes tesseract forms.
Mm-hmm.
And when you multiply the differentials of those tesseracts, which then allows for fractality, when you multiply the larger size, right, which would be square root of 25 is going to be positive 15.8, and its lesser fractal root, is what we call it, is negative 1.58. You've got this 10x differential between the two, but when you multiply the areas will match exactly as what we see in the real plane. When you do that with volumes, that does the exact same thing. It works at all scales and all dimensions. So now what I'm saying is that maybe the natural log, it ends definitely with the Euler number, but it begins with the square root of -1.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, 10 too, makes sense as well as the number, because even if I call it an extra arithmetic symmetry. It's not like mathematical, but it's, when you look at what 1 is, it's like finiteness. It's oneness, but then there's also 0, which 0 is also infiniteness, because when you look at how we represent it, in just symbolism of the circle, it's like the square root of oneness and infiniteness at the same time. It's just fast.
Well, yeah, I mean, it comes down to 1 and 0 interchangeability, which is what the X is in quantum computing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the superposition,
mm-hmm.
right? And what we're really looking at here, the actual numeric representation of this will be 0.99999999999, because 9 by itself will act as 0.
Yep.
And 0.999 infinitely is mathematically 1.
Yep.
So this is the superposition, and this is the X's representation of in Roman numerals 10,
mm-hmm.
right? Which you could say is 9.9999999 equals X.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting concept. And how does this actually comport to real world stuff? Well, what is the value of nothing to the power of nothing? 0 to the power of 0. What is it? What's the answer to that? Sounds like it'd be 0, right?
Yeah,
but I think it'd be 0. It's not 0. It's 1.
Yeah, it'd be 1, right?
0 to the power of 0 equals 1.
Yeah.
Now, mathematicians have a hard time. There's a camp that believes it equals 1, and then others that make calculators, like the Google folks say that, no, it's 1. It's absolutely 1. And then you've got the people that make the Apple calculator that say, no, it's not a number.
Yeah.
It's nothing, right? Because they can't wrap their heads around this.
Yeah.
But I can tell you it's 1,000%, without any question, unequivocally, the number 1.
It has
Because if you take 0.5 to the power of 0.5, you will get, 0.707. And if you take, 0.05 to the power of 0.05, you will get 0.86. It grew from 0.707 to 0.86. What?
Yeah.
And then if you take 0.005 to the power of 0.005, you're going to get like 0.91. It will, the more zeros you put in front of that, the closer you get to 0 to the power of 0, it becomes 0.999999999. It creates the X superposition.
Yeah, which is 1.
Which is 1, and also has the role of 0, because 9 acts like 0. Any number you add 9 to will always revert in mod 9 analysis back to the number you added to the 9.
Yeah.
9 plus 4, right, equals 13, but 1 plus 3 still equals 4.
Mm-hmm.
So this is true for all scales. So nothing to the power of nothing equals everything? Really?
Yeah.
And the square root of negative everything is the actual logarithmic base value for the prime number distribution until the first, 15 zeros of accuracy. It's not Euler. It ends at Euler.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking through the telescope through its wrong end.
Yeah.
We do this with everything in academia lately.
Yeah, I know. It's wild when you see it. We're literally looking at things backwards.
Why in the heck would we use the Euler number when it doesn't even express as correct for distribution of prime numbers until you're way the hell out in the number series?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be more obvious to start with the beginning of the asymptote?
Mm-hmm.
And then having that be the square root of negative 1? That's freaking profound.
Yep.
So I'm going to write a paper on this. We'll publish it. I'm sure I'll get like all kinds of backlash from people, whatever. Maybe not. Maybe I'll believe differently. Maybe I'll believe I won't get all this backlash and I won't have to experience all the backlash about it. But it is what it is. I know this to be correct.
Well, it will also, regardless, it will also get, people who see, the truth in it as well. Even if it does get backlash, that doesn't matter. It's like, it's just, there's always some naysayers, but that doesn't mean you don't just focus on pushing forward.
You know what's even more interesting to me than prime numbers? Time numbers. That's
I know.
The opposite of prime.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So prime time.
Yeah.
Time numbers are the numbers with the highest degree of compositivity.
Yeah.
They have the most number of divisible factors. And guess what? The most efficient of these time numbers is the number 60.
Yeah.
Because no other number of that small size could produce so many children of prime, divisible factors. Mm-hmm. And that is a beautiful thing. And the reason why we use it for time, it's so genius. Again, we're looking through the wrong end of the telescope.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to look very anciently to understand our future.
Yeah, I think so.
Because maybe time is a torus. So when we think about it in those terms, we want to be able to express time without these long fractions of expression. Mm-hmm. So the base 60 system, because 60 is this convergence of base 10 and base 12, and we know that base 10, I'm a fan of base 12. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big time fan of base 12. But the fact is, and physicists use it as a crutch.
Yeah.
And that's what the two things that physicists use as crutches that drive me absolutely batty. And the beauty of mathematics is that it's a self-evident proof, right? It's like I could, with a piece of paper and a pencil and a compass and a straight edge, I can write a proof for a theory mathematically. Can't do that with physics. You got to have experimentation.
Yep.
But remember, we can't remove bias from our experimentation.
Yep.
We cannot remove bias from our experimentation. So therefore, we all have this challenge of trying to remove bias. And that's why placebo effects work so well. That the best drug in the world is placebo. We should put, some sort of like awesome name on, call it placebo or something like that. And then it'll sell like crazy. We'll say, side effects could include night sweats and unhappy marriage or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the truth is that we've been looking through the wrong end of the telescope, because actually when we understand that time itself is broken down into these numbers because of this convergence, and I believe the base 12 system is hidden within the base 10 system. There are actually patent a calculator with a base 12 embedded within base 10. So one of those numbers is a number I call Eno, which is like one backwards, right? An anagram of one. And that number is the 999999 combo.
Yeah.
And we know, the reason I know that I believe strongly that there's numbers there is because geometrically we can prove it, right? And it actually ties to the circumference of circles. We have all the polygons in the first 10 integers, but where are circles in this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about what you just said, but I'm trying to think about which ones are the most relevant to this right now, but there's a lot.
So 3.660254 would be another one of those numbers. Let's call it an integer. This is musical nodal positions that exist that we don't quantify as whole integer values, but they act like whole integer values.
Yeah.
And they're all related to root 3. So we have 3.660254, or we have 6.339. And those two number sets add up together to this infinite nines.
Mm-hmm.
And these numbers have positions. So if I start with a side value of 1, right, and that's my 1 integer, then I have a side, 2 of those that creates this diagon, right, or an angle, call it with a 30-degree angle or 60-degree angle, and I'm like an incomplete triangle, right? Mm-hmm. And each one of them has a side value of 1. And then I have a triangle that's equilateral, and each one has 1 as its sides. Well, the next number then would actually be, what is the circumference of the circle that has now been circumscribed around that triangle? Because anytime we make a triangle, we can't see it, but there's a circle there around it because it's now closed. Anytime you have a polygon, there's a circle. You could say, okay, is it the circle that made the triangle or the square or the pentagon? Or is it just inherent that it exists there?
Yeah.
I believe it's inherent. It's part of the gravity around it, right? So now if we take the circumference of the circle around the triangle, the first polygon to close, then we have 3.66. And the same thing happens again when you start making a trichetta, right? 3 triangles, or you have a vesica, and the circumference of the non-overlapping portions comes out to 633 for the vesica. And for the triquetra, the circumference of the non-overlapping portions is 9.999999. So these values are like the underrepresented circles that have not been represented in our integer set. And I think it's a fundamental because it's inside the base 10. I don't have to add more to the base 10. It just means that within a 360-degree circle, I actually have 432 nodal positions. Right? So now it starts to change things. And that's why base 60 becomes so important. Because base 60 is where that convergence of base 10 and base 12 happens naturally. And that's why all the numbers that are this convergence of base 10 and base 12 number systems have the highest degree of compositivity. They're the ones that we use for time. This is 60 minutes times 60 seconds times 24, which is also 6. 2 plus 4 equals 6, equals 86,400 seconds in a day. And then maybe it's all just based on dimensions from there. Maybe we could start with the number 6 and call that the value of a fathom or a line, which is 6 feet. And then we realize that, wait, 6 feet is also just the sum of the Euler number plus the meter plus 1 foot equals 6 feet. So that means that 6 feet, 1 fathom minus the meter equals the Euler number? It's exactly what it means. We think that all this is arbitrary. Some king's foot had some value. No. These are fundamentals. They're part of this construct.
That's why it sticks. It's like, that's why it continues. It's not just chosen by us arbitrarily. It's built into the structure of reality.
We're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. Or the microscope. And that's the issue. And that's part of the construct that we're here to learn to transcend. And once we do, then we have access to this field of knowledge, and our brains become very balanced and clear antenna.
Yeah. That's a whole nother topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, there's so many applications. I think understanding prime numbers is, I mean, everything from cryptography to medicine to, I mean, quantum computing, all kinds of applications emerge from, I think, understanding prime numbers. I think that ultimately all of this leads back to, you know, helping us understand consciousness. It's interesting that numbers, people who didn't, you know, like math in school, I was one of them, and until college at least, and then it's still, as soon as I started studying consciousness, it's like you become fascinated with numbers and you can't help it. And it's like they're just these structures of, and these quantities of 60 and 24 and 432 and 10, all of them have these properties around them that seem to be intrinsically built into the structure of consciousness and therefore, you know, the universe. And I think that leads to endless applications of them. But it's fascinating to just listen to the constant symmetries everywhere. So.
Okay, I like this. When did Robert let his nuts hang on these numbers? Well, just for the record, I don't let my nuts hang on anything, but that's supposed to, you're supposed to laugh at that, like no one laughs. It's funny. But no, I definitely don't. But I think that you know, prime numbers are very powerful, and there is something about their, you know, indivisibility, right? Which makes them very unique, and they serve a very big purpose, but it's only in the context of working with all of the other numbers. So they all serve a purpose. No, like I said, no one number is any better than any other number. Just like no one person is any better than any other person. Yeah. We're all living our own experiences and through our own perspectives and our own biases, all at different stages of our progression in life. And all should be loved and all should be accepted.
Yeah, I say a lot, the context, people say information in context, but context is information. All of these numbers are the way that they are in relationship with all these other numbers. And you can't separate context from information. That's, I mean, information theory, like you said earlier, is I think proved to be fundamentally linked to geometry even more so than.
Yeah, they're going to prove that the energy loss, right, related to gamma photon annihilation. They're going to prove it. It's University of Portsmouth. I'm excited for this. This is what we call time as well. Literally, the passage of time is the annihilation of an electron spiraling up from the past towards the future versus a positron spiraling down the spiral of time from the future towards the past. That means that there is retrocausality from both directions.
Yeah.
And this is why I believe in destiny. I don't believe in this concept of for every choice I've ever made, there's a different universe. Oh, fuck that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's retarded. I'm sorry.
It's just a way of trying to reconcile something that you're trying to avoid. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that people don't like the concept of destiny because it implies to them that there is a lack of choice. But as you were saying earlier, that, you know, we choose the circumstances that we're in. And I talk about this a lot, that like determinism and choice or will are not opposites. They're dependent on each other.
100%.
Yeah, it's
what we call destiny is really just the free will of our higher selves.
Yeah. Yeah.
It operates independent of our space-time experience.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you could take this same concept to dimensions, right? Of the 6 feet of the fathom, you know, the foot, meter, cubit. And by the way, the Great Pyramid's built on all of those. And if you haven't watched Alan Green's, you know, treatise on that, it's outstanding.
It is.
Find it on YouTube. Just type in Alan Green CPAC 2016. But basically, if we take that concept then from like 6 and we take it to the second power, 6 times 6, that then gives us 36. And we multiply that by 10 to the first power equals 360 degrees of a circle. So now that's how we measure area. We're measuring area in this flat Euclidean plane, right? We have an X and Y axis. So then we take it to the next level, right? So 6 to the third power, and that's going to give us 216, right? And if we multiply that by 10 to the second power, that gives us, we had 10 to the first power expansion, now 10 to the second power expansion for the second dimension. That's going to give us the number of minutes around the Earth, 21,600 minutes on a compass. Okay, it's also the measurement of the Earth as its equatorial circumference in nautical miles. By the way, did you know that the nautical mile measurement for the speed of light is the golden ratio? 161,810 nautical miles per second is the speed of light.
People think that's just like coincidence, as if coincidence that's meaningless could even happen, which is not consistent with even mathematics.
It's so funny when people say to me, "Oh, you have pareidolia. You have pareidolia." I'm like, "Well, what's the opposite of pareidolia?"
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's so funny. It's not even. There's a word for it, right? There's a word for pareidolia. Well, maybe there should be a word to describe people that cannot see obvious patterns.
Exactly. It's blunt. It's like what Helen Keller said. You know, lack of sight.
Exactly. And looking through a telescope through the wrong end is not going to give you a microscope. Someone wrote that. It'll actually just push the image farther and farther away from you, right? It's not going to be like all of a sudden I can use it as a microscope. That'd be kind of cool if you could. You could have a telescope and a microscope in one. But no, it's not the way it works. It will push the image farther and farther away, and you won't be able to see it at all. And that's I think, is what really happens to us, right? So then we take, so we're now at 21,600. So now let's take it to the fourth power. So 6 to the fourth power is 1296, 1,296. And we then multiply that by 10 to the fourth power, or 10 to the third power, right? We multiply that by 10 to the third power, and guess what we get? We get 1,296,000. So we were at 10 to the first power, right? 10 to the second power, 10 to the third power, against 6 to the second power, 6 to the third power, 6 to the fourth power. And guess what? That's exactly the number of seconds on a compass. So maybe if a compass is supposed to be a direction, a way for us to look and analyze direction in space, and space and time are inseparable, then maybe the compass is actually the true measurement of time.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
And it's all based on base 60. The most advanced mathematical system. Come on, these people were not even supposed to have pi. Give me a break.
Yeah.
How did they come up with all of this? I'm sorry. The Great Pyramid is perfection when it comes down to the discovery that I luckily made, which is that it's the only isosceles triangle, because an equilateral triangle can't do it, that shares the height of a circle as its circumference of the circle versus the height of the triangle, and will have an identical area as that circle. So it's trining the circle. Like squaring the circle, it's triangling the circle. It's pretty remarkable. And they had this degree. I mean, it has to create exactly a slope angle of 51.8539 degrees. And it's perfect. It's so perfect. There's no, it's self-evident.
Yeah.
And to say that that was just a pure coincidence, I won't call it low IQ, but I will call it an inability to see obvious pattern.
Yeah. Or even a desire to not see even.
Oh, yeah, because by the way, that is a conditioning bias.
Yeah.
There are so many people that get upset when there's an implication of pattern or simulation or higher consciousness, even though that higher consciousness might just be you. They get upset about it because they immediately go back to like the day that they found out that there was no such thing as Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And they get upset about it. It's like, oh, there's no Santa Claus. Who lied to me? This is so terrible. It's the same kind of concept. Or they had some traumatic experience, which is legit. Whatever it was, I believe they chose it.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect it. I respect it. But as Leonardo da Vinci said, there are three types of people: those who can see once shown, and those who just don't see.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not their timeline to choose to see.
Yep. Yep.
I got to run now.
Yeah.
Great
Thank
talking
you very
with
much.
you. I'll do it with you again at some point, but it's really been a pleasure to talk with you. As always, best of luck in your relationship and marriage. I'm very happy for you, and hopefully we'll see some little Tylers along the way. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. But I love your work, and please keep going with what you're doing.
Yeah, same. I'm very inspired by your work, and I really appreciate this time that we had. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.